Well, thank you. It's wonderful to meet your group. Um, and yeah, just um, that's kind of my background, having been, in uh, monastic practice for a very long time. I just recently had this big change in my life where I'm no longer in that. Um, it's not that I'm no longer practicing, but I'm no longer in the monastery. So I'm having a weird transition that seems to be going on forever and ever, as is all of all of us are in the same transition. I think with this these weird happenings for the last year. And yeah, I'm going to loosely talk about the Brahma Viharas because what are we always talking about but the Brahma Viharas? Um, I kind of started the year off, 2020 off, um, engaging with the Brahma Viharas. Brahma Viharas being the four abodes, compassion, loving kindness, joy, and equanimity. Um, and whether that was, of course, by accident or some, blessed, uh, understanding from the universe to throw that at my feet to explore in that particular time right before the pandemic. I don't know, and before all of these, before 2020, at the beginning of 2020. Um, I often come to these groups and I always have this feeling that people expect me to um, basically talk about uh, Black Lives Matter or uh, George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, um, and that there's this expectation that I will say something about that in particular. And I'm always confused because in my mind, that's what we're always talking about. If we're talking about the Buddha's teaching, if we're talking about um, Dharma practice, um, if we're talking about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Brahma Viharas, this is what we're practicing. This is what we're always, who are those myriad beings? Um, who's included in those myriad beings that we speak of when we talk about vowing to save all myriad beings when we take the four vows or we recite the four vows. Nothing special is happening. There are George Floyd's and Breonna Taylor's who are suffering and losing their lives every day. It's been going on for ages and ages. It's going on right now somewhere. Um, injustice, um, outright murder every day. What happened this past year, and this includes the experience we've had with this pandemic, um, is just a continuation of our suffering that we got to watch on TV. You know, it's, you think about what happened. We were watching ourselves watching. We watched our own suffering, you know, as a human being was choked to death on camera over $20. And we watched the other human beings murder him on camera for $20. And then we got to watch the rage and despair of whole communities burning for $20. And we watched other human beings, yet more human beings, pick up guns and murder even more human beings from a exchange in a grocery store over $20. What is that saying about our suffering here together? You know, there are people who watch that and, you know, went into all kinds of questioning and fear and anger, despair. And there are people who watched it and in their continuing rage, disillusion, despair, thought that that looked about right. That's what should happen. What's everybody upset about? And there are other people who watched it and said, I can do nothing. And this is how it's going to be. And this is how it always is. And nothing will ever change. And lock themselves and their hearts away. We talk a lot about enlightenment, or in my experience, you know, enlightenment is this word that's thrown up at us in Zen practice. You know, the image of a person sitting on a hill with their head shining because they are now, you know, they've seen everything, they know everything, they feel, you know, their feelings, their emotions have disappeared, and they are safe, and they are away, and they are above, and they have transcended. And many people, myself included, come to Zen practice seeking that safe, above, beyond the dukkha. But in this past year and exploring things, and before, when I look back at the very, very basics of the Zen teaching, which are, you know, that go back beyond the Mahayana and Dogen and all that, you know, you go back to the first words the Buddha said, this is suffering. The cause of suffering, the origin of suffering is our own delusion and fear, greed, anger. That the way beyond this suffering is by walking the Eightfold Path. And that is it, you know. And that change is inevitable, that everything is subject to change, that everything is empty. All of which points back again to the Brahma Viharas and compassion and kindness equanimity, and joy. Because you can't have any of that unless you walk the path in some way or acknowledge the path in some way and take responsibility for your actions and your speech and your thought. And your livelihood and all the things that we think are everyday. You know, something in this culture tends to make put everything in our heads, you know, make it intellectual. Even the idea of everyday Zen, you know, what is your everyday? It also intellectualized, in a sense, the idea of interdependence. We can all talk about it, but are we ready to feel that interdependence and our connection to everyone, including the George Floyds of the world, without it having to be flashed on a screen at us every 5 minutes? Um, are we willing to go past our delusion that peace can simply be cultivated by blissfully grabbing a cushion and taking the position, and that's all that's being talked about when we say Zazen. Zazen is a very important, is the fundamental of Zen practice. But what is Zazen? We can talk about it not ending on the cushion and carrying it with us as we go through our lives, our everyday lives. But what are we carrying? This idea of Zazen, this idea of being open and being liberated on our cushions, a picture of it, shining head and all? Or are we out there, you know, in spite of whether it's perfect, our Zazen is perfect or not, being what the Buddha described? Practicing the Brahma Viharas, you know, the Brahma Viharas, again, the four abodes, you know, we sit on the cushion. When I sit on my cushion and I try to abide there, you know, between those four walls of compassion, joy, equanimity, and kindness. And I try not to, concretize those walls, because that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Those walls expand when we're doing Zazen, you know, wider and wider. They come to encompass as much of our being as we can put out there. And we all have our limits because we're human beings, and because we do discriminate, and because we do fail to drop those boundaries that keep us separate from, or that delude us into believing that we're separate from the rest of the universe, that we're special, that we are somehow different from the one that is sitting over there, or who appears to be sitting over there. That we're different from the floor that we sit on, and all the beings that are around us that we ignore all day long because, our eyes can see only so much, our ears can see only so much, our senses are so limited. But there are points in Zazen, and I'm sure all of you folks who've been practicing Zazen for years and years have touched those moments when that abode is all encompassing, even if it's just for a second. And then you get up from your cushion and life happens. And maybe that second influences that life, that second of openness and realization and freedom. Because I think, I've started, well, I'm questioning, as we should, everything. The word enlightenment, not throwing it away, but questioning it as to whether it translates right, what we're seeking. And a lot of people have started, using the word beyond enlightenment. Awakening is one, and being awake and liberation. Because that freedom from delusion and seeing things really as they are, and seeing the interconnectedness and the emptiness of all is being liberated from those things. So when I think of the Brahma Viharas, my question is, who abides in these Brahma Viharas with me? I'm not sitting here alone. And, there's reasons why Dogen in particular advises that we not sit alone. This is a group activity. This is a Sangha activity. Is Zazen, is Zen practice. The reason we come together to sit is so that we can hear each other breathing, so that we can see the bodies and feel the weight of those bodies, even if we're not touching each other. Feel the weight of those bodies in the room. Hear the noises, hear the things that irritate us, and the lovely voices and the irritating voices. We can hear the traffic outside and the door slamming. Because that is our relative reality. That is where we are. Those are the things that we have to accept and incorporate to come through to this enlightened state, this state of liberation, to be free of them. Compassion cannot be developed without the folks we need to show compassion to. And joy is not joy if we're standing glad, on the mountain all alone, uh, and it's not shared with all the beings around us. That's kind of, it feels greedy and selfish. Because what are you joyful about if there's nothing to give and nothing to receive? Equanimity, being able to stand still while the winds are blowing, while pandemics are raging, in the face of other people's anger and fear, and our own fear that comes from that being in proximity of that, being around that. All of that is part of practice, is part of practicing being in those abodes. It's not that we should not seek peace, and that we should not do anything about our pain. Far from it. We should be able to look at those things, hold those things, know those things deeply, because the Buddha didn't say, Buddha said that there's a liberation from suffering. The Buddha did not say there was liberation from pain. Pain is a signal that something is wrong, that we need to pay attention to. The suffering is what we do around that pain. The blame, the fear, the delusion of denying that it's happening, the way some do. All of that is the suffering that circles around pain, instead of just looking at the origin of it. This year, we've got to experience pain very deeply together, in the politics and the public health issues, the economy, all of those things. Pain. And what did we do when that pain, there's a signal that something needs to move, needs to change. No telling what that change will be. Is changing, regardless of what the heck we decide to do, what we plan to do. Change is change. So the Brahma Viharas tell us, and all of the teachings, because it's not just the Brahma Viharas, this is just, the basics, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, the first teachings of the Buddha. Everything else is just, really commentary and an interpretation. It's pointing us directly at what we need to be doing, is developing compassion. When we look upon, the people who are out there, whether they are angrily protesting, whether they are trying to police in a absolutely chaotic situation, whether they're trying to teach in schools that open and close every 5 minutes, whether they are, in fear of being evicted, or in fear of even going into their offices to do their work, who've lost their work. All of that are opportunities for us to practice compassion, to practice kindness, to show equanimity in the face of all these storms raging around us, and to find joy in the sharing of both our plight and of both our triumph and our plight. To understand, joy is to be there for somebody. Joy is to experience the real connection to people and things and all beings, in spite of dark times. So I really don't think I need to mention names. What we need to look at is, when we look around our room, our physical room, yeah, and the room that is, this heart from where we practice our zazen and practice our dharma. What are the faces? What do the faces? What do the bodies? What do the beings in that room look like? Are we really including all beings when we say that? Liberation theology says that we can't be liberated if there are others in slavery. The Buddha said that too. Dogen said it. To be enlightened is to be enlightened with the whole world, with the whole universe. If you're kicking somebody out and you can't even picture that face among the beings, there's people who can talk about the whales and the pandas and beings that, that we don't even know whether they exist, gods and goddesses and aliens. Include all those faces. But is George Floyd's face among those faces? The real everyday is right in front of you every damn day. The real everyday abides with you every day. And it shouldn't have to be dying on a screen to be a part of this. It shouldn't have to be Buddhist. It shouldn't even know the word Zen. Doesn't even have to know the word Zen for it to be included in this. And that's part of our practice. That is our practice, to know that. That is enlightenment, or whatever term you want to put on it, enlightenment, liberation. So I think that's all I want to say for now. I know that you all usually have a question and answer. And I hope I didn't ramble on too long, but thank you for listening. And if there is time, if somebody wants to ask a question, or if you want to say something, or have something of importance that you need to talk about, please do. Thank you.
Good morning, Chimyo. I'm Shishin. I'm your pen pal. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming today. We are we have a little program which we call, like the one in New York, Commit to Sit. Theirs is Commit to Sit 2020, and then now coming up 2021. We just call ours Commit to Sit, and we're right now beginning to look at Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And listening to you this morning, I'm struck by the importance of what Suzuki Roshi says about just be here. Really, just be here. Not just be here, but really, really, really just be here and notice. I think that's all I need to say.
Really, just being here and noticing is very important. That is exactly what we're trying to do, be here and notice. Our problem comes when there's a need to respond. And I think sometimes some people take that as, just be here and notice. And, the person next to them falls over and I'm just noticing. No, that's not noticing. Noticing is reaching over and caring beyond that. But there are times when somebody could fall over next to us and we don't even notice. We're not there enough to notice. We're not there enough to respond appropriately to what is actually happening in the world. So
Chimyo, thank you very much for your talk this morning. What really resonated with me was, as part of the Four Abodes, is the sense of carrying joyful mind, and because sometimes I can get so sort of bogged down in the seriousness of what I'd like to accomplish before I die, and I sometimes forget that it is a joyful path. It has, difficulties for sure, but, our reliance on joyful mind, I think, is important. I mean, I love the Four Abodes and, or the Four Immeasurables, and it really feels like maintaining that sense of joy towards all beings, and understanding that all beings, as I want joy, all beings want joy. As I want to be free from suffering, all beings want to be free from suffering. And it can lift our heart. And I think when hearts are lifted, we feel so much more confidence and trust in the way and in the path. So thank you. Very inspiring.
Thank you, Sensei, for such a moving moving talk, and it's something that I'm sure I'll be coming back to on the cushion quite a bit over the coming days. But you put that in a way, practicing the presence of those things that I hadn't considered before. And I really thank you for it. And thanks so much for taking time out to be with us this way. Sincerely appreciate it.
I wanted to ask you, if I may, about the difference in how you can carry on now when you are sort of back in a wider community where there is so much more to distract you, if you will, than when you were in the monastery. I know that you mentioned at the beginning that you made this switch just now. Is it much more difficult, or how are you coping? I would like to hear a little bit more about that, please. Thank you. You got muted again, I'm sorry.
I think my computer is fighting against me here. There's my suffering right here, this second. But yeah, it's very different. I was basically in community for 10 years, and being out here sort of loose is very, and not really loose because of the pandemic, but is very, this, and at times it's absolutely distressing. I've lived with a schedule or pieces of schedules for a long time. So it is a little difficult, admittedly. And it's change that I have to deal with and learn to abide with. It's very nice to have groups like yours to come to, again and again. I still sit with groups online and so on, and with old Sangha members online. And it's not the same, but it's it is a grounding thing to be with the Sangha. But on the other side of that, I do have to learn how to be in this myself. When you take the robes, the way I was taught was that you are always perpetually in training. It doesn't matter what color robe you're wearing on. It's just another type of practice that you move to or whatever that you continue with. And so this piece of my life here, learning to be without the monastery and the monastic practice is another training for me. You have to work through it. One of the great things about monastic practice is that it's always, it's always working. It's always working you. So yeah, other things are working on me now that I had not experienced or had not experienced in a long time. But I'm getting used to it. And I feel like I have a lot of support out there from Sangha. So doing okay. It's the way it is and how it should be. Thank you for asking.
You're muted, Susan.
Okay, how's that? Okay. Good morning. I was so taken by two phrases. One was sitting, hearing each other breathing. And then you said, feeling the weight of other bodies. And you were referencing that in, I thought, in terms of sitting together. But I'm going to think of that as being together. So when I'm in the woods walking, feeling a kind of breathing, and you were speaking about embodiment, and that was so beautiful and meaningful. You know, it's a kind of mental projection that those trees are breathing, that the folks in Home Depot, where I seem to be every day, are breathing and being in their bodies as I am. So I really thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. It's very important. The other thing that came to me through this practice and through the practice I've done through the years is a real understanding that this is a mind-body practice. It's not the shining head. It's the whole body reaching and stretching and touching the universe. And that is very different than this, sort of intellectual enlightenment or whatever. And part of what Sangha practice does for us, as you all probably know, is it forces us to contend with the rest of the universe, both in our body, not just in our minds, not just in a picture or an idea that we can manipulate however we want, but with the body. Zen, in my understanding of the history, comes directly from yoga, through the Buddha and his practices were yogic. Some of those practices were yogic, completely a mind-body sort of model. And one of the things that, I'm not a particularly physical person. There are times when I walk around, there have been periods in my life when I walked around and I could have just been a floating head. And what's that down there bothering me? Just a total disconnect. So it's not just knowing our own bodies, but also knowing our bodies in relation to the myriad beings out there. To understand that a tree is breathing, to be able to hear that and feel that, to be able to hear not just the noises of people that people make, but to be aware enough and present enough to feel, the effect of those atoms that just walked in the room, pushing, not just pushing the air, not in some magical way, not just to know everything, but to be aware of it. It's to recognize, who's sitting next to you from the rhythm of their breathing. Is, when you practice with people for a long time, there's communication and there's exchange that's going on, especially when you're moving in silence and together with the same intent, or with mutual intent that you learn from, that you feel. And it makes those other people real. You know, I think what happened when we were watching George Floyd on TV and the man cried, "I can't breathe." You know, did you not feel your own breath caught in your throat? That's aware. That's being in the world. That's being, you know, and it's not just being with the nice stuff, with the blissful stuff. It's being, you know, when the person sitting next to you has a cold and can't breathe very well, and noticing that, and sending some of your strength and some of your breath that way, in a, not in some magical way. It's not magic, but even just the wish and the that's compassion. What is it but compassion? And helping that person through these difficulties that we have, our difficulties. So I think that's a very important part of our practice, to remember the mind and body. That Zazen isn't this contained practice. It's something that's reaching and being reached toward, knowing that you're being reached toward as well. So.
Thank you. That's very helpful. One morning in our commit to sit, we talked about the fact that now we can't be in a room full of people. We can't have that real experience, and yet we found that the virtual experience does approach it. It doesn't replace it. It's not the same. But I will tell you from my own perspective, there have been some palpable moments of feeling the energy of the other beings in the room, in the virtual room, and the energy of that is very powerful. And while true, it's not magic, it's accessible to us all. And it is a poor substitute for in person, but it's all we have right now. And if we practice it and we commit to that practice and continue to commit to it, I find it grounding, empowering, and very helpful. So your comments were right on point and certainly resonate. It is wonderful when you're in a room of 15 or 20 people and you're walking in meditation, and the walking meditation becomes one. So all 15 or 20 of you are moving as one. That is incredible. But frankly, we have, I think, and I think Sheik, you can say what you think about it, but I think we have, as a group, in our morning sits, come to that several times, not every time, but we have come several times. So thank you for your comments. They're very helpful.
Yeah, I have my problems with Zoom and this thing, but as you said, this is what we have right now, and I think we're all using it very well. It doesn't replace anything. It's just an extension of what we can do to be in contact and to stay in contact with each other. So I agree that, you know, this is a very, we are, you know, very lucky to live in a time when this exists, you know. And I think it doesn't have to be exclusive. You know, I hope that Zoom groups will continue after this period of time has gone, because it has brought people together in a very important way. But we also have to remember that, you know, this is not, as it is, it's kind of a stopgap. It's kind of a way of, another way of participating. But for me, at times, though I think there's great deep exchange going on, it can't replace, you know, the true togetherness of Sangha, of being in the room with each other. There's a little bit of a danger of not realizing where the disconnects are. It's a little too, put it this way, and discreetly if you want, it's fine. It's a little too easy, you know. And the effort that comes with being together in a room and working together is, I don't know, it makes it not the same, not better or worse, not the same, because we don't know where this is going to go. We have to see. So thank you for that comment. I think that's what.
Good morning, Sensei. Good morning, Sangha. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for sharing with us this morning. I am appreciating right now this idea that pain is a signal and suffering is the management of the signal. And it's coming to mind for right now that the more I move away from pain and go into this me, my solution, the more, you know, the depth and the duration of the suffering lingers. And I just am now, I'm just now having an understanding that, you know, turning back into the pain is turning back into oneness and turning back into solution instead of pulling away and making that suffering linger. So I really appreciate that opportunity to look at pain differently. Thanks.
Yeah, even the lessons of physical pain, you know, what we try to do is avoid what's happening, avoid having to address really what's happening because of fear, because it means that, you know, we are vulnerable. It means that we are not permanent, you know, and how long that suffering lingers even beyond the pain, you know, if you think of how we, even if you had a broken leg, for a little while, you're still gonna baby that leg. You're still gonna, you know, kind of be careful with that leg, even when it's healed. So it's part of our delusion that we can remove ourselves from pain. Instead of seeing pain for what it is as a signal that something is going to change, something is going to be different. The other thing we do with pain is to try to put it back the way it was. And it's never the way it was. It's what it is. The way it was is long gone. The way it's gonna be, you can't see. This is being right there with it. One of the basic teachings of Zen, especially when you first begin, is learning to sit in the cross-legged position and finding your position that works for you, and so on, and the pain that goes through that, and how much suffering I remember, you know, and I still do, getting into that position and feeling the pain in my back and feeling the pain in my knees, and knowing, you know, intellectually that, you know, that's just a stretch. You know, I haven't stretched that muscle, and I have to stretch it out if I'm going to be in this position. If I want to be in this position, if I want this to be the lotus position, I'm going to have to endure that pain. And that signal is that that muscle is stretching and changing and moving in ways that I'd avoided before. So that's a very basic lesson of Zen right there. And it's throughout, it goes throughout our practice, learning to be with Sangha, learning to follow the guidance of our teacher when our teacher is suggesting something that is difficult for us to look at or difficult for us to try, and all the resistance that we put up, to everything. There's resistance to everything. There's resistance to getting up off the doggone couch. Okay, so here we are. So yeah, I don't know if I'm addressing that right, but.
So I would like to ask you one more thing. In essence, what I hear you saying is that we should try to differentiate between feeling compassion for people for their pain and feeling compassion for them for their suffering. And those two things are also they're not the same for others, just that they are not same for us. So in essence, then we could feel compassion. We should feel compassion for pain, but the compassion for other people's suffering has to be more measured because their suffering comes from their delusion. Is that what you
Oh no, not at all. Compassion goes across the board. There's no judgment when somebody is suffering, or whether it's suffering because of real pain or it's suffering because of whatever's swirling around their pain. Compassion is across the board. We have to feel compassion for those who are, who are losing a limb or dying. We also have to feel compassion for those who are doing the killing, because there's pain, that action is coming from delusion and fear and pain somewhere in there. And it doesn't matter. It's sort of like, I used to use this analogy a lot, this pig pen thing. And then I heard somebody else use it in a different way, and I'm like, okay, whatever. But remember Pigpen from Charlie Brown, the little boy who was always walking in the dust cloud? That's all of us. We're all walking in this dust cloud of delusion and pain and fear and all of that, and not being able to see each other clearly because of all the dust we're all kicking up. To be able to be free of some of your dust allows you to be able to see someone else fighting and resisting and crying and acting in ways that may be horrible to you, but recognizing that behavior and that fear and that anger that they're displaying is their pain. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter in terms of our own experience. It doesn't, our own reaction or not reaction, not a reaction. Our own response to it has nothing to do with the judgment of whether that is worthy of our compassion or not. Compassion is across the board. There's no worthy or not worthy. It's just what we do, and that's what we're trying to practice here. So it doesn't matter whether we're looking at delusion or whether we're looking at real blood spilled on the floor. Pain is pain, suffering is suffering, and it deserves our compassion. So I'm sorry if I misled in that or said something that was
No,
misleading,
no,
but
you did not. Clearly, this is something that I am struggling with.
it's very,
Perhaps what I wanted to say is that our reaction has to
Mhm.
be sometimes different.
Mhm.
The compassion and reaction or response to people do not need to be, they don't have to be equal to one another. We can feel compassion for something
right.
and not respond to it. And we can feel compassion for something else and then really do have to respond to it and do something about it.
Mm. The thing is to try, what we're trying to understand is, you know, there are tender beings. We are all very tender, vulnerable things, not just in the flesh. And we have to be able to care for each other with that in mind, you know. And we also have to watch our discriminating mind, you know. We all make judgments about, oh, well, this is, you know, this is and this is this. No, we're all this, just this. We're all just this. And it's that discrimination, you know, that comes up, you know. Another basic tenet of Zen is that dualistic thing, you know. There is no this and that. There is no us and them. There's just one. If there is just one, then that pain is mine. That fear and anger is mine. How do I respond? By not growing it, you know, through, you know, whether it's through my zazen or through, you know, metta practice or whatever. I don't grow that pain anymore for any of us, you know. And the discriminating mind is us, you know, in this relative world, trying to make our way through and, you know, do what we have to do in the relative sense. And somehow not forgetting that ultimate sense as we are doing that. Yeah, and that's very hard. So we pass judgment and we say, oh, this is worthy of my, you know, concern, and this is not. And it's not saying that we should all have to take care and deal with everything, because we can't possibly. But it's how we hold it in our body and mind, in our hearts, you know. And Zen, you know, there's a character that is body and mind, that means heart. That means feeling. And yeah, and love as well, showing love to all beings, regardless of like what they're doing, like what they look like, you know, like what they're saying, you know, regardless of whether they're for or against you. No discrimination. So, long-winded I'm getting, sorry.
Thank you so much.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you for agreeing to come.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Sangha.